Shalom. Welcome to all of the watching family over Facebook or whatever platform you're watching this presentation from. My name is Adiel. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Universal Temple of Israel, Universal Temple of Yahweh. Today's discussion is in season. We'll be discussing Passover, as Passover is around the corner for those of us who follow solar time. We want to go ahead and start with our Bible, and we want to investigate the Passover and Exodus and how it relates to us this day. Before we do that, I do want to mention something. Each and every one of us who celebrates and observes Passover should be doing so of a willing heart. It is not a high holy day we celebrate out of force. We do it willingly. We do it willingly because we love the Creator Yahweh and we love to keep His commandments. Let's first go to 1 John chapter 5. Now, for those of you watching, I need you to understand that the Passover and the importance of the Passover is found throughout the Bible. The law and the keeping of the law are found throughout the Bible. There is no part of the Bible that makes the law and the commandments of the Creator Yahweh out of date, out of fashion, irrelevant. There is no part of the Bible. So we're going to start at 1 John chapter 5. First John chapter 5, verses 2 and 3. Verse 2 reads, "By this we know that we love the children of God Yahweh, when we love God Yahweh and keep His commandments." Verse 3, "For this is the love of Yahweh, that we keep His commandments. And His commandments are not grievous." Furthermore, if we go to 2 John chapter 1, verse 6, and it reads, "And this is love, that we walk after His commandments. This is the commandment, that as ye have heard from the beginning, ye should walk in it." So we see here that the commandment has not changed. Does not change one bit. So in order to investigate the Passover, we have to go to Leviticus. We're going to go to Exodus. Right? We're going to move around in the Old Testament. We're going to go to the book of Chronicles. We're going to go to the book of Ezra, because the history of the Passover exists in all of these verses. So let's go ahead and look at Leviticus. We're going to start at Exodus. We're going to start at Exodus first, okay? We're going to start at Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12, verse 11, because there is a point that I want to push when we talk about Passover. There's a couple. I need you to understand that this is not a physical and carnal observation. Passover is not for the carnal minded. It is not for people who are thinking purely in the physical. If you're single minded in the sense of your mind operates on one track and you can't see things any other kind of way, this is not for you. We're also going to stress the importance of a sense of urgency because Passover is about that. Passover is about a sense of urgency. For those of you who've looked outside, you will notice that the trees around you are starting to sprout brand new leaves, right? The birds are chirping. The weather is rapidly changing. While they did change the clocks, right? Astronomically, right? And astrologically, we are approaching a particular time where the previous dominance of nighttime or the darkness is being balanced out. And daytime and the light is about to take front and center. Exodus chapter 12, verse 11. And it reads, "And thus ye shall eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord Yahweh's Passover." We see here that the first night of the Passover Feast of the Red High Holy Day was done in haste. It was done with a sense of urgency. Because for those of you who are familiar with the story, the children of Israel left Egypt on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So they did not, as you know, have time to allow any yeast to rise. At that time, they would use a lump of the previous loaf, an uncooked lump of the previous loaf, to kickstart the fermentation and the rising process, right? The old lump. You'll hear that term later. And this is how bread rose. But it was important, it was an instruction from the Creator Yahweh that we not use the old leavening, that we start brand new. And the reason why that was is because the plan was to leave Egypt. Let us go ahead and talk a little bit more about Passover so you understand the history of Passover. We're going to move on to, in the same chapter, verses 27 verses 43, verse 48 and 49. Verse 27 reads, "That ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord Yahweh's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped." See, this was all done for a reason. And it was done in a sequence of events with the outcome being the children of Israel leaving Egypt. Verse 43. "And the Lord Yahweh said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof." Verse 44. "But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. So we're talking about the difference between one who is circumcised and one who is not. Understand, as I stated earlier, this is not a physical thing, right? This is a spiritual thing. This is a figurative thing. Moses pleaded with Yahweh that he should not speak with uncircumcised lips. Now, we're not talking about chopping the lips off. We're talking about the veil that covers something, that makes it numb, the thing that prevents it from being of full potential. When we talk about the circumcision of the mind, we're talking about the ability to see things literally, figuratively, metaphorically, symbolically. Verse 48. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord Yahweh, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. So we see here the Passover is for everyone. It is not just for people of a certain nationality. The Passover is for everyone if they are circumcised, right? And we're talking about a different kind of circumcision. And he shall be as one that is born in the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. Verse 49. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. So I have to make sure you understand that Passover is a universal celebration for all people in all kindreds if they be circumcised. Leviticus chapter 23 tells us when we keep the Passover. I have to go into a little background and history of the Passover because we're going to delve into it a little bit more, right? Because the history of Passover describes what our people have been historically going through and describes the process that we're going through right now. Understand this whole imagery of Egypt, of the Exodus, is playing out again today. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 5. In the 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord Yahweh's Passover. So, 14th day of the first month. That's in spring, the month of Abib. If you look at your calendars, if any of you have those big calendars that you sit out on a desk, if you look at the month of March, you're going to find something interesting. Within about the next week or so, on one of those dates, it's going to say the first day of spring. Right? This is a phenomenon this is an astrological and astronomical phenomenon when spring begins. And for those who are astute, you will understand it begins sundown March 19th to sundown March 20th. That is the first day of spring. And so with that, 14 days later is the first day of the Feast of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, High Holy Day. But remember I told you about being circumcised, about being clean? Well, it's his way of letting you understand that there's more to Passover than a meal. We see that in the New Testament, but we see it in the Old as well. Numbers chapter 9. Numbers chapter 9, verse 10 and 11. And it reads, "And the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying," verse 10, "Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If any man of you or of your posterity," that means your offspring, "shall be unclean by reason of a dead body, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto the Lord Yahweh." Verse 11, "The 14th day of the second month, at even they shall keep it, and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs." So it is on the night of Passover that unleavened bread, bitter herbs, that the Passover meat are partaken. And if for whatever reason one is away or one is unclean, we are to keep it 30 days later. We see this happens multiple times in the Bible. Remember, I told you the history of the children of Israel is riddled with adulterous period after adulterous period, after reunion, after adulterous period. They backslid constantly. Second Chronicles chapter 30, verse 5. Second Chronicles chapter 30, verse 5. Almost there. Second Chronicles chapter 30, verse 5. And it reads, "So they established a decree to make proclamation throughout all Israel, from Beersheba even to Dan, that they should come to keep the Passover unto the Lord Yahweh, God of Israel, at Jerusalem, for they had not done it of a long time in such sort as it was written." So we see here at this time, the children of Israel had not kept the Passover in a long time. Right? So what were they doing? Well, it's obvious. They were following after the other nations. They were following after other gods. They were backsliding. They were committing divine adultery. So, understanding this, we saw in Numbers chapter 9 that the Creator Yahweh creates provision for us so that we can repent. And that if we are not clean at the moment, we can get clean and still participate. But remember what was read in Exodus chapter 12. There is a sense of urgency that must be upon you. Right? As we approach the spring and the daylight hours elongate rapidly to match those of the nighttime hour so that they may soon overtake the night, we have to be just as urgent. We have to understand that we must move in haste. We don't have forever to clean our minds, to clean our garments, to gird ourselves, to put on our shoes, to pick up our staff. We don't have forever. Ezra chapter 6. Ezra chapter 6, verses 19 and 20. And it reads, "And the children of the captivity kept the Passover upon the 14th day of the first month. For the priests," this is verse 20, "and the Levites were purified together. All of them were pure, and killed the Passover for all the children of the captivity, and for their brethren, the priests, and for themselves." So this is further evidence that the circumcision has to do with purity and cleanliness. I mean, we know on a physical level that it's harder to stay clean, right? There's all this dirt and gunk and bodily fluids that get trapped up when you're uncircumcised. And we know that the circumcision allows one to be clean, allows one to be exposed. So this is what we have to do. We have to come into Passover this way. And what about the yeast? We're to leave the yeast behind. I need you to understand that this is spiritual things we are talking about. While we do physically, right, observe the feast using these rituals, they're supposed to teach you about spiritual things. Leaving Egypt, right, being a part of the Exodus, it means, right, the word Exodus is in the Bible is Shemot, which means names. And it means coming into your own name, come into your own character. See, the children of Israel did not know the identity of their God when they were in Egypt. When they were assisting the Egyptians, living amongst the Egyptians, taking on Egyptian ways, helping to build the treasure cities, right? Not observing the feasts which the Creator Yahweh commanded them to observe, right? Not holding that feast, but rather toiling to build up the Egyptian treasure cities and monuments to their gods. The Exodus was about coming into their own name, their own selves, their own character, their own land, their own nation, right? And this is a character, a land, a nation juxtaposed to the Egyptians, in contrast to the Egyptians, who believed in many gods, right? And the Hebrews believed in one. Revelations 18, Revelations 11. There must be something in Revelations 18, but we're not going to deal with that right now. Revelations chapter 11, verse 8. "And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified." I'm not going to get into that last part of it. Those of you amongst us who are listening and watching, who are astute, already understand this. But it mentions that great city. And we already know in Revelations that great city that it's talking about is Babylon. And we're not talking about the old Babylon. Iraq is of no importance today. We're talking about a spiritual Babylon, a predecessor. And we're talking about the spiritual progeny, right? The type that is referred to as Babylon. It is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. It's called that because of the nature of Sodom and the nature of Egypt. Egypt means and represents bondage in the Bible. We understand that thousands of years ago, this bondage was a physical bondage. We also understand that now, as described in the New Testament by Yeshua, that this bondage is a bondage to sin, to transgression. So we see we're urged to understand things in a spiritual way as well as a physical way. You need to understand things in both ways. I need you to understand that the Feast of Passover and these rituals represent spiritual things. This is described in the New Testament. And for those of you who believe that we don't really follow the words of Peter, and James, and John, right? That the new revelation was given to the Apostle Paul. I need you to understand what he has to say about this. First Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 8. And it states, therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I told you this is a spiritual thing. That the leavening that you had and that you used in Egypt, that you were commanded to leave behind, that you were commanded not to use as you exited Egypt and went into your land, is the leaven of malice and of wickedness and of everything that the Creator Yahweh does not want you to bring into the land of promise. And you must do it quickly. All of this occurs within a 24-hour period, but a day. Passover occurs in a single day. And after that was the Exodus from Egypt. I need you to understand something as well, family. The children of Israel had the benefit of witnessing plagues right there in person. And they got to see swarms of locusts, right? Swarms of frogs, hail, bloody rivers, the death of the firstborn. They got to see it in what many believe to be a literal fashion. So they knew, and they had the sense of urgency. They knew when it was time to go. We nowadays who live in the spiritual Egypt and are shaking loose the shackles of sin and transgression against the Creator Yahweh, we have to be able to see with spiritual eyes. When the waters of the Nile became blood and all the waters that came from there, right? Even if they were in vessels out of the Nile, when they all became blood, it represents something else as well. We know that according to Revelation 17 and 15, that in visions, water represents the multitude of people. We also know that blood represents violence. So, does this have anything to do with the meaning, the spiritual meaning of the waters turning to blood? An increase, an unexplained increase in violence? Could it mean something else? We also know that the waters of the Nile, right, were the pathway to which both goods and wealth came into Egypt. And we know what being in the red represents. Sometimes people have their wealth tucked away. And we know that things like inflation happen, and even with your wealth tucked away, it still hurts that wealth. All that you got saved up is worth a little bit less. Could this have anything to do with what it means spiritually? The Creator Yahweh knows, and it's not my place to try to tell you what it means. All these things, these plagues happened to Egypt thousands of years ago, and time repeats itself, and you would see the same things occurring spiritually to spiritual Egypt. The waters turning to blood was from Exodus chapter 7. And in Exodus chapter 8, we see that there's a plague of frogs. Now, I need you to understand that the book was sealed by Daniel. And until he who was worthy came to loose the seals thereof, the understanding of the Old Testament was lost. That was part of Daniel's job. But he, of course, who is worthy to loose the seals, has already come and loosed them so that things could be understood. Exodus chapter 8, verses 1 and 4. Exodus chapter 8 reads, And the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Let my people go, that they may serve me. Verse 2, And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. We know that a border represents the edge, right, of a country as it touches or comes in contact with the next country, right? The borders of a country are typically designated as the land-based extremities of a country. Verse 3, And the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thine netting troughs. Verse 4, And the frogs shall come up both on thee, and upon thy people, and upon all thy servants. The key words to remember here are that these frogs would come up to the borders. They would come into Egypt from the borders of Egypt. That is to say, the areas where Egypt connects to the neighboring country, and it says they would go up into Egypt, meaning they came from the south. Frogs are interesting creatures because frogs go both by land, they climb over things, and they can even go across smaller bodies of water. And they came forth into Egypt abundantly, and they were everywhere. This was a plague upon Egypt, and it caused distress upon Egypt. Now, what does that mean? That is up to you to decide. Let the Spirit of truth, the Spirit of God, guide you into the meaning of this. And lastly, we can look at the plague of locusts. Exodus chapter 10, verses 4 and 5, and then I want to jump over to 12 through 14. Exodus chapter 10, verse 4 reads, "Else, if thou refuse to let my people go," and he's speaking to Pharaoh, "behold, tomorrow will I bring the locusts into thy coasts." So these are contrasted from the frogs in the sense that these would come to the coast. And that's strange because we don't know that locusts actually come from the ocean. They don't. So this is alluding to something else. Verse 5, "And they shall cover the face of the earth, that one cannot be able to see the earth. And they shall eat the residue of that which is escaped, which remaineth unto you from the hail, and shall eat every tree which groweth for you out of the field." Meaning these would come to your coast, and they would consume everything that was left. They would fly, right? Locusts are jumping and flying creatures. Specifically, to come to the coast, they had to be flying. And we'll see that later. And they were said to eat everything, all the residue, everything that was left over from the other plagues in which Yahweh plagued Egypt for their unwillingness to let his people go. Exodus chapter 10, verse 12 through 14. Verse 12 reads, "And the Lord Yahweh said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the land of Egypt, for the locusts that they may come up upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail had left. And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord Yahweh brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts." Verse 14, "And the locusts went up over all the land of Egypt, and rested in all the coasts of Egypt. Very grievous were they. Before them there were no such locusts as they, neither after them shall be such." That is such a claim to make, that prior to these locusts arriving to the shore, there were never locusts like this before. But also, more importantly, there won't ever be locusts like that again. It states that they were brought by the east wind to the coast, meaning that they flew in from the east. I will let you sit on that and think about what that may represent as a plague to spiritual Egypt. Now, I'm not here to try to interpret the scriptures for you. I'm just kind of here to point the way, to help you understand that these verses mean more than what you simply read. You have to study these verses because they will help you to understand the signs that that great city, spiritually called Sodom and spiritually called Egypt, would go through. The signs that you would see, all these things took place prior to the last plague, which you need to understand that the Bible describes this last plague more than once. And it actually describes to you what this last plague means. It means more than you think. Because it was after the last plague that took place the night of the Passover. It was after that that the Exodus took place. You see, all these things have to occur before the great Exodus takes place. We are talking spiritual things here, people. But in order for you to exit Egypt, you must have already exited Egypt in the mind. That's part of what Passover is about. Leaving that old lump in Egypt and coming into the name and into the land that was promised to you. That is what this is about. And on that vein that we started with the sense of urgency, I need the family to understand that the Bible speaks in many different ways. We have to be willing to understand it in many different ways. And with all the things that have occurred and all the things that are sure to occur, being ready and being at the ready are very, very important. It hurts me to see people, come upon an emergency and they scramble to get ready. That happened prior to Hurricane Katrina, right? That sort of thing happened. People were trying, in the wildfires, people were trying to grab all their belongings and flee, right? They didn't have, what was important and what they needed to sustain themselves for a certain amount of time already ready at the ready. Because if ever you have to get up and leave for whatever reason, surely you should have a way of being able to get up, grab your loved ones, and just go. And not be without, right? Not be at the mercy of nature. To not be at the mercy of other people. To not be at the mercy of chance. So during this last part of today's discussion, I do want to talk about emergency preparedness, right? And I wanted to talk about it, and more than talk about it, I wanted to demonstrate it in the form of, 3-day preparedness, right? And so I'm going to move these up out of the way and just bring something here, family. This right here, as you can see, some people call these emergency bags, some people call them go bags, is a bag with everything you pretty much need for about 3 days if you had to get up and go. Now, all the adults within your household, I suggest should have something like this. It includes a couple change of clothes. And for those of us, obviously in the South, there are a lot of bugs, so I suggest long pants. And obviously, those in the North are going to choose the dress as it suits their season that they're in, right? It has the sort of minimum adequate amount of water for 3 days. It has an adequate amount of calories in this bag for 3 days for an adult. It has supplies here for making a tent, getting out of the rain and the weather. It has flashlight. It has toiletries. It has supplies for cleaning your hands, staying fresh. It has supplies for lighting fires if you need that sort of thing. And as I said, these bags should be tailored to the individual adult that the bag belongs to. If you're a mother with a very young child and your child, uses diapers, diapers weigh very little, put some diapers in your bag. A few small packets of wipes to clean the child. Since I'm a medical professional, obviously, my bag contains certain medical supplies, tourniquets, eye wash. It contains a first aid kit, a more extensive first aid kit with sutures, materials for stopping bleeding, basic medications, different wound care supplies, and inside the bag, of course, we have change of clothes. We have our food. We have our water. And it's just enough that you can get by independently for 3 days. And this whole bag for me weighs about 20 pounds. It's not difficult to carry. Though, if you are a daytime desk warrior like many people, you may not be in the best shape. So it helps to go to like a private park or a secluded area, or if you have a workout room where you live, in a treadmill, strap on your bag and walk with it for a while. Get accustomed to carrying that weight on your back. You may not need to carry it on your back, but in the event that you do, a bag like this won't do you any good if it tires you out within 5 minutes. If you do have to walk, if it tires you out in 5 minutes, it does you no good. It's a burden to you. So these are just some of the things that this bag contains. A poncho for being able to walk in the rain if need be, and keep everything here dry. All of our straps are suited for me, my body, my shape, my build, to fit closely, comfortably. And yeah, let me see what else this has here. It has a way of recharging cell phones in case towers are still up in your area or you need your phone for navigation. I told many of you of a particular application that allows you to store a map of wherever you are, whether that's the state of Florida, the state of Georgia, the state of California. Stores it locally in your phone so you can use it to navigate. As long as GPS satellites are active, you can use it to navigate without the use of any cell phone towers, right? The cell phone towers don't have to be operational. You can still navigate and get where you need to get, right? And that app is called Here, just like the word Here Maps. It is a way of charging your devices in case you need them. It has a little of everything that you would need. Um, and so I urge all the watching family, the family with us, to put together something like this. I think I mentioned this years ago, 2, 3 years ago, that we should. And the lesson of Passover teaches us that we should have a sense of urgency because of the many of you who are watching understand that time is short. And suddenly and unexpectedly, like a thief in the night, that day may be here. And we may have to leave in a different way, but this is not necessary. And this may be necessary for something completely different. But the point is, just like insurance, you want to have it in case you need it. Once you need it, it's too late to get it. So I urge the family to be wise, like the ant is wise. Do not sleep in slumber, for we learn in the book of Matthew, I believe in chapter 24, 25, I believe it's chapter 25, about the 5 wise and the 5 foolish. The 5 foolish did not prepare. And the night when the bridegroom came, they were not ready. And we understand what this represents, but parables have multiple meanings. And they have a lot of knowledge to give you and bestow you if you're willing to receive it. This is also a parable about being prepared, about emergencies. Emergencies don't come when you want them to. So we have to be prepared for them. So that being said, I do urge all the family to, put yourself together something like this so that in case you got to get up and go, you can get up and go. So with that being said, I want to end today's discussion. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I will remind you again that the Creator Yahweh's Passover is coming up very soon. Give us a call, contact us if you need any more information concerning Passover. And if you want to dine and enjoy this High Holy Day with us, we will be here, Orlando, Florida, I believe April 5th. We will be celebrating it collectively, open doors to the public. So contact us for more information on that. Have a beautiful day, a wonderful evening. I love you all. Shalom and Aniyah.